Hello, welcome to the first edition of the ESPN version of the Warriors Stock Report. Back after I don't know, 7 or 8 years. Been a long time. Here with my new colleague, Anthony Slater, my longtime friend. Used to do this on Twitter after games, Slater. We decided now that you're here at the Four Letter that we bring it back on the YouTubes as a weekly feature. And when better to bring it back, the Warriors Stock Report, than with the final ending of the Jonathan Kuminga saga for now, with him signing this 2-year deal with a team option for the second year with the Warriors this week. Finally getting a resolution. He's going to show up here in the Bay on Thursday. Warriors talked about it here on Wednesday.
It's here today. Flew today from Cleveland. Signed it in Cleveland last night, by the way. And then flew this morning. Should be taking a physical. Like, by the way, we are in Chase Center. Tim Bontemps, you were in the Bay Area just for the stock report, I think.
I am in the Bay Area for only the stock report and no family reasons or any other reasons. And we are in the bowels of the Chase Center. We took us a long time to find room. Slater is in some sort of storage closet somewhere.
Yeah, I blurred the background. The funny thing is, I mean, everybody thinks you're here for a specific reason. Al Horford did his intro presser, and he's, in the Bay Area, he's looking out, and Tim Bontemps is there, so he thinks you were here for the Al Horford presser.
Yes, Al Horford, who we'll get to in a bit. So we will take stock of the Warriors. As we do.
I will say the original stock report was so long ago that the way I remember it starting is we would be sitting on press row in old Oracle Arena during the Dynasty Warriors days. And I think we were arguing about JaVale McGee and his place in the starting lineup.
That was the original stock report was about JaVale McGee trying to make the team. And you and Marcus Thompson, our dear friend, congrats to him on now being part of Amazon's crew in addition to the Athletic. You guys trying to tell me that JaVale McGee, by the way, JaVale McGee just was being compared to Wilt Chamberlain in the NBL in Australia, had 32 and 15 the other day.
They're featuring him. They're featuring him.
That's right. So yes, that was the beginning of the stock report back in, I believe, 2016, fall 2016. And so we're going to take stock of where the Warriors are at once a week. And let's start with Jonathan Kuminga. He signed his deal, Slater. You've obviously been all over the reporting on this for months. Or where is the stock at for Jonathan Kuminga right now? Stock up, down, neutral, somewhere else?
Pocketbook up. I mean, that was the one piece of leverage in this negotiation from the Kuminga side was the $7.9 million qualifying offer. Obviously, they agitated it. There was times, even though you knew it was bluffy from their side, you did felt like the desperation from Kuminga to take control of his career, however you want to determine it. But look, unrestricted free agency next year, clearly there was a lot of restricted free agency is so interesting because I think we'd all agree Kuminga clearly couldn't force his way to another team this year because of his market, because of just the Warriors cap dynamics. But guess what you can do in unrestricted free agency? You can have meetings with executives and other teams, and you can get pitched, and you could get on a Zoom with Doug Christie and Scott Perry, and they can tell you you'd be the starting power forward, and we think we would utilize you this way. And even teams that don't have cap space and aren't trying to sign and trade, you can say, hey, look, theoretically, if you were an unrestricted free agent next summer, we would potentially be interested. And so there was times that I thought he might take the qualifying offer, and despite the financial gap that obviously at the end of the day, Aaron Turner and Jonathan Kuminga decided they couldn't pass up. They agitated for the player option. The Warriors throughout the entire process, to them, to us, to everybody, were saying not happening, and it didn't happen. Which creates an interesting scenario over the next few days and weeks and months where Jonathan Kuminga is coming back on a contract that pretty transparently is very much a trade piece, and he's being paid a lot, but I'm not sure he's that happy with the deal and the structure of the deal and the signal of the deal. But he's kind of got to play ball, especially if he wants to get traded. It's an interesting dynamic.
I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. It has been for months. It's why it's been such an interesting story. I would agree with you that obviously his pocketbook is up. He gets an extra $15 million from what he would have gotten if he'd taken the qualifying offer. I would say across the board, otherwise, though, pretty big stock down for Jonathan Kuminga. He and Aaron Turner, his agent, as you said, blustered a lot about they had to get a player option. They didn't get that. They didn't get to even keep the implicit no trade clause if without picking up the team option. To go back for a second, he's on a 1 year deal with a team option for a second year. That means that in theory, Jonathan Kuminga could have blocked any trade this season that he wanted to. As part of this, the Warriors, one of the sticking points was the Warriors wanted to waive the right to do that. Well, when he signed this deal, what did he do? He waived the right to do that, right? So when you go down the line, really at the end of the day, we spent the last few months with Jonathan Kuminga and Aaron Turner talking a lot about all the things they wanted. And yes, you're right. They met with the Suns, they met with the Kings, they surveyed the market, they looked around, but ultimately they really didn't get anything that they wanted. They didn't get to a new destination. They didn't get a player option in the deal. They didn't really get a lot of long-term security. And they made it pretty simple for the Warriors to move on from him in January when he can be traded starting on January 15th. Now, if he winds up in a good situation between January 15th and February 5th, and he gets a new deal next summer, this could work out great. But I would say, to your point, right now, based off how the last few months went, I think it's hard to believe Jonathan Kuminga is going to walk in here and immediately be the world's greatest teammate and be totally locked in and fired up and ready to play. And the Warriors are going to have to navigate that, and he's going to have to navigate that. And for a guy that clearly believes he has got star potential in him, which is why he didn't take the 2 year deal with the team option that was sitting out there to give himself an extra $25 million. It's going to be very interesting to see how he navigates this situation and how he handles the situation, how the Warriors handle him, because I think we would agree his biggest value to the Warriors now is as a trade chip in January. And that could mean that he spends a lot of time not playing between now and then, especially if he doesn't show up with a great attitude or totally locked in to do the things Steve Kerr needs him to do on the court to play. And as you and I both know, that is going to be something you're going to be closely monitoring, and it will be very interesting to see how that all shakes out over the next couple of months.
Yeah, you mentioned it. He had 3 year 75 on the table. Now it was a team option on the third year. So, but an extra 25-ish guaranteed. And he said no to that. And part of the reason he said no to that, while through this process, I have been hearing he does not want to be traded mid-season, which is understandable. I think he wanted the new destination, but wanted the new destination fresh with the training camp and all that, because no player really likes to be traded mid-season. But part of the reasoning of taking the 1+1 instead of the 2+1 is it is the quickest, most tradable contract where, there's obviously been a lot of language about like the idea of ripping it up next summer. The idea of ripping it up next summer is actually for the team he gets traded to. So you go there, the team knows you have to go back to the table, and you extend off that first year number. I know at the end of these negotiations, this 92-day war, or whatever you want to call it, every dollar mattered to the Kuminga side in the first year,
Yep.
because that to them can be the number that they can extend off. And potentially they're, with the Warriors, if rosy situations happen and it stays here, but for the next team. But January 15th is the first day he can be traded. There's a long time before January 15th. And the one thing I know that right now the Kuminga side is taking a little bit of solace in, and we'll see if it plays out this way, but they really think he like took a trampoline off that Minnesota series last year as a score, and they think he's had a really good summer. And like the messaging I've been hearing the last couple of days is like he's really good right now. Like he's coming in, he's fresh, he's healthy off the ankle. I'd agree with you. I think the structure of the contract, which he doesn't necessarily love, could lead to him getting the ball and being like, I'm not doing pin down screen, I'm not going to the dunker spot, I'm gonna get to my mid range. And that could generate problems, but there's going to be a lot of early season games, back to backs, guys sitting out, where they're going to need him to score. Steve Curry even kind of mentioned that today. He's like, there's going to be nights they need him to do. Like the Minnesota series, the moment Steph Curry went out, he was their leading scorer. So Jonathan Kuminga, I think, can ease a lot of this tension and maybe boost his value if he is becoming as good as he thinks and his people think he is becoming.
Yeah, no question. I want to put a pin in that. So let's go to the guy on the other side of the negotiation, right? Mike Dunleavy, who has been holding the line for the Warriors front office and by extension, Joe Lacob, who, as we know, is a big fan of Jonathan Kuminga, to try to get some kind of deal done to get Kuminga in a position where he could be traded. Because if he'd signed a qualifying offer, not only would he have cost himself a lot of money, he would have had the implicit no trade clause. He would have been able to block any trade in it, or just a straight no trade clause. He would be able to block a trade anywhere, and he would have been making less money and been able to totally control his market. And that would have made it very difficult for the Warriors to turn him into a difference making piece in the spring. So,
Can I do
or
one
like,
addendum to that?
absolutely, yes.
The other thing I heard from the Warriors side towards the end of this about why he should not take the qualifying offer was like they were saying even teams like the Kings and Suns wouldn't want him on the qualifying offer because they're not necessarily flooded with cap space next year.
Oh,
It's
that's
easier.
right.
Yeah. It was
It
like
makes
even
sense.
if you, yeah,
It
go ahead.
never made sense. It never made any sense for Jonathan Kuminga to sign the qualifying offer, which is why it was a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing about whether he would take the qualifying offer ultimately. Because for every single reason on the board, it only made sense, even if it, like you said, even if the objective is to get out of Golden State and go somewhere else, he would have been hamstringing himself 7 different ways if he signed the qualifying offer. So, with that all being said, where are we at on Mike Dunleavy at the moment after the way this played out? Now getting Al Horford in here, getting DeAnthony Melton, getting Gary Payton back. The whole offseason, the Warriors are now basically all done in a span of about 5 minutes because they finally got Kuminga done.
Yeah, I look, his stars are happy with the roster. And I've been saying it and reporting it all summer like this, the internet love to just yeah, stock up is what you're referring to here. And I guess I should have that is our show and our term. Um, you know, the public all summer was making jokes, I think understandably like 9 players on the roster, only team in the
We had a
NBA.
recurring segment
Yeah.
on NBA Today asking, have the Warriors signed anyone yet? And the answer was no, it
Yeah,
was not.
but every time you talk to anybody behind the scenes, we're like, Steph Curry knows what this roster looks like. Draymond Green
Yes,
knows what this roster looks
as
like.
did we.
Yes, they know Al Horford was on the roster. They were fine with everything. So he has clearly the trust and belief and confidence of his stars, which in this league is very important. He end of the day got Jonathan Kuminga to sign the contract that organizationally they wanted, including all the way up to Joe Lacob. So at this point, his boss would be happy. I do like the roster fit of the Horfords. Like I think they're going to compete this year. Um, I would if you were to question uh part of this summer, I would even go back to last summer and particularly in comparison to maybe the Bob Myers tenure. Uh, there's been some contentious negotiations and and it's not necessarily the job of every front office. You don't have to have rosy negotiations. You don't have to ever have every agent and every player feel great about you on their either on their way out the door or while they remain your employee. But Jonathan Kuminga didn't necessarily like how any of this went, and they brought him back in a situation that could. We'll see how this locker room handles everything in the first few weeks. Like it could be an uncomfortable situation that, in a lot of ways will be because of the stalemate of the summer. And I will go back to the previous summer, like the Klay Thompson negotiation. And I'm not spotlighting Mike Dunleavy necessarily fully on this, but that's a Joe Lacob thing. Like that didn't end great with a legend. And whatever, business is business, as we've heard 95 different times today. I think, the Warriors at the end of the day look like they did good business with the roster. I'd like you to get to that because I know that's definitely of your opinion. But I will say, like, the personal dynamics here, I'm tracking that early in the season because they did pour a little bit of gasoline potentially on a very important season, at least the first couple months.
I do think in the Warriors' defense, I think if you look at how they handled this summer, let's compare it to the Philadelphia 76ers, right? Quentin Grimes, the other remaining restricted free agent, signed the qualifying offer today, Wednesday, right before the deadline, right? The Sixers were pretty motivated clearly to get under the luxury tax this season, and therefore they didn't even really negotiate with Quentin Grimes at all, right? They gave him a couple offers last week, but there was never any negotiation for months with a pretty good player, because they didn't really feel any need to, right? The Warriors, I think, handled this pretty fairly with Jonathan Kuminga throughout, for all things considered. And I certainly think they could have squeezed him if they wanted to, even certainly more than they did in terms of the money. And like they're right up against the second apron. They gave him basically every dollar they could give him.
That was also
They're,
because they want to trade him off that dollar. And he
well,
knew that.
yes,
And he
but
knew that.
yes and no, right? Like it does make business more complicated for them with as close to the second apron as they are. Like it would be easier for them to have a little more wiggle room to like maneuver the roster around in trades. But look, you're right. Like, yeah, it's a two-way thing and it's a business decision to give them this money so they can move them later. But I do think they handled it pretty fairly at the end of the day, which is why it ended up, I think, with the resolution it probably was always going to. And look, like you said, the one lever that the Kuminga side had in this was to try to make this uncomfortable, to try to get what they wanted. And I think Mike and the Warriors deserve credit for holding firm and not buckling, saying, yeah, look, you guys can ask for what you want, but here's what you're going to get. You can decide what you want. And it does set them up with a contract that um, they can really use to try to, you know, really improve the roster
Yeah, and I
in
think
January.
and I think a lot of the concern early on, right, will be like, well, Kuminga has to play himself into being like a valuable trade chip, but the other part of it is, and we'll see if they actually do it, but Jonathan Kuminga is also an expiring contract at this point, and they have a lot of
Yeah,
their
but the no trade clause waived.
yeah,
If somebody doesn't want Jonathan Kuminga when they trade for him, they can just turn down the team option
yeah,
and be out of the money.
and you latch a first round pick to them, they have a lot of their ammo.
Yep.
You could
No,
so like
they've been
yeah,
waiting to add that fourth piece with their three guys, right? And like maybe there's a world where Jonathan Kuminga becomes the fourth piece. Maybe they go out this season and get the fourth piece. But the thing that was interesting to
maybe
me,
Brandon Pajemski explodes into the fourth
sure,
piece.
could be
Sorry,
Brandon
sorry, sorry.
Pajemski. I thought it was interesting how confidently Mike Dunleavy talked about the roster today. Like, obviously, there is a lot of focus, understandably, on the Kuminga situation. But the thing that stood out to me was him just off the cuff saying, yeah, look, a year ago, I thought this team had to get better. I don't think the team has to get better now. Like, I really like our team. I think we really have a shot. Because I would still say the Warriors need to get better to have a shot, but I do think they're better than they were a year ago. They obviously get Jimmy Butler in February. They add Al Horford, who, if he can stay on the court, will be, I think, a really, really great fit here. Um, he will not play in back to backs. I'm sure everybody danced around that today, but he didn't play in back to backs last year for a reason. They need to manage him through the year, but if he can be healthy in the spring, he will be an excellent playoff player for them and will really fit how they want to play. But I thought Mike's confidence in the roster he'd put together was interesting. And I think does foretell that these guys really are going into this year confident that they can be a real force in the Western Conference, assuming these old guys can all stay healthy.
You know how like a lot of times like playoff loss is revealed to teams and organizations that like, the truth about themselves. The the I don't even you could say problem, however you want to term it, but like the Warriors didn't learn that they weren't good enough in the playoffs last year.
Mm-hmm.
They still, right or wrong, believe them or not, are of the internal belief that they would have beat the Timberwolves. Steph Curry had them up 1-0. And if he didn't tweak his hamstring, they think they, at least would have competed at that level. Again, it's probably a little outlandish to then say, hey, then what are we, the Thunder? Then they would have gone to the finals and won. But like they don't feel like they were beaten, like they were overwhelmed in a series. Like, yeah. So I think that informs why Mike Dunleavy feels that way. They feel like the space center. I mean, can you hear how much they were talking all last year about like how important a stretch center, to the point that when Quentin Post showed up and hit like 4 threes in the game against Milwaukee, it was like this revelation of like suddenly
Yes.
the floor was wide open. Well, now they have Al Horford and Quentin Post in year two. And they just feel like that's going to help everybody, including, by the way, Jonathan Kuminga. And you know, Aaron Turner was obviously really honest in like, the interview on the Hoop Collective. And one of the interesting things I thought he said is earlier in the summer when they were talking about how much money Kuminga could or couldn't get, they were talking about the second apron and that they were going to sign Al Horford to the taxpayer and second apron cap themselves. And the Kuminga side was like, actually, we kind of like Al Horford on the team. That would be very good for Jonathan Kuminga. He is one guy that will be helped by lineups with Al Horford. Because if you give him space, he is a downhill wrecking ball. So you just this roster fits. Again, am I taking them over the Thunder? No. Nuggets, no. Rockets, I still am probably going to say no, but obviously we'll see with the Van Vliet injury. But they're in that middle mix, and if you guarantee health, again to a team that has a 35-year-old, 37, 37, 39 in the starting lineup. But if you guarantee health at the beginning of a playoff series and freshness, yeah, they have a puncher's chance against anybody.
Yeah, and they have. And Steph has always been a guy who has given Oklahoma City in particular a lot of problems. And so, yeah, look, I think outside of the Thunder, I think if they're healthy, I think, like you said, I think they have a swing against anybody. And that's before they potentially improve the roster between now and February, which I think you and I would agree. They're certainly going to do everything they can to do. Whether they can or not, though, depends on obviously some things out of their control. Now, the other guy we heard from today, besides Al Horford and DeAnthony Melton, was Steve Kerr. Um, Steve Kerr has obviously had an up and down business relationship with Jonathan Kuminga over the past couple of years in terms of, Kuminga's frustrations with his fit and his role, and Steve at times having him in and out of the rotation. I think you can debate the merits of his decision making on that. I think there's plenty of evidence that shows he's had pretty good arguments when he's done it. It also has led to, as we alluded to throughout this whole time, some hard feelings on the Kuminga side in particular. So where are we at in terms of the stock on Steve Kerr heading into a season where not only does this team have expectations, but as we were joking about after the press conference, this is a team that even for someone who is probably about as good as anybody who's ever done the job in terms of managing a locker room personality wise, this is going to be a lot of work for Steve Kerr to manage a team full of an awful lot of personality this season.
Yeah. So there was like 95 pieces of Warriors news this week, as I'm sure you monitored. I mean, they signed the whole team. I
Oh
mean,
yes, I forgot. I was literally meant to talk about this
yeah.
thing that I forgot to even mention. So I'm glad
Well,
you're bringing it up.
it's a perfect answer to your question, I think, which is Steve Kerr. Yesterday, I asked him about his contract. It's lame duck contract time for Steve Kerr,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's entering the final season of a deal. He's as established as any coach in the league. It would be very reasonable for him to say, Steph Curry has 2 more years left. Jimmy Butler has 2 more years left. Give me
Another
another
year.
year.
Yeah.
And he's not doing it. He's actively saying, I'm not seeking an extension. I have such a good relationship with Joe and Mike that we're just going to play out the season. And if it's time for me to walk away after the season, it's time. If I want to keep going and they want me to keep going, I will. I just think that it's a very freeing approach for Steve Kerr, where in many ways, I think he could coach it however the heck he wants to. I think he doesn't really have to worry as much about the politics of, we know the owner loves Jonathan Kuminga and was, is very, part of these negotiations and would love nothing more than this Kuminga contract to lead to a max contract because he's the next era of Warrior star. But Steve Kerr is going to play Guy Santos if he thinks that that's going to help him win that night, or he's going to, in a lot of ways, say whatever he wants in press conferences. I thought he was pretty, firm in his, evaluation of the Kuminga situation today. And like basically, and as he said, and I think this sometimes gets lost from people who aren't on the ground, like him and Jonathan Kuminga are not, they don't bump heads personally. Like it's just a playing time thing. They have plenty of conversations, but it's a playing time thing. But I guess to your question, one of the best to do it. Obviously, he is going to be facing, a level of tenseness, a level of pressure, and all that. But as I think you know better than anybody, when you have an established reputation like he does, when you don't really care about your future in a sense of like, he's not worried about getting fired or reputation or this or that. Like, if it's time for him to walk away after the season, he's going to walk away. He's still going to be a coaching legend. If he wants to step into the TV booth, he'll probably be the number one free agent for TV. If he wants to get it, yeah.
Not
If he,
probably.
yeah, if he wants to get another job, like that'll be available to him. If he wants to retire, he good. He's made plenty. He's won 9 championships. So to answer your question, I think part of why he's going to be able to do the job well, that is going to be a high pressure job, is because like, what's the drawbacks for him?
Yeah, it's pretty much always stock up for Steve Kerr and has been for going on 40 years now in his professional career. I thought it was interesting. Mike Dunleavy was on the Bulls a decade ago with Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade and Rajon Rondo, who were then called the Three Alphas after Dwayne Wade left the Bulls and an acrimonious free agency, or left the the Heat to go to the Bulls in acrimonious free agency. And I had a laugh, as did our guy Nick Friedel, who it's good to see back on the circuit again in your old place, the Athletic. When Steve Kerr said, "Well, yeah, we've got three alphas, and we've got Jimmy Butler who's an alpha, we got Steph Curry who's an alpha, we got Draymond Green who's an alpha," like essentially saying, "Yeah, there's not going to be a problem with Jonathan Kuminga because the veterans in the locker room are going to be the ones telling him to get in line if he gets out of line," which I thought was a pretty deft way of sort of moving the stuff with Kuminga to the side, because then it's not really about Steve Kerr and Jonathan Kuminga. It's about Steph Curry and Jonathan Kuminga and Jimmy Butler and Jonathan Kuminga and Draymond Green and Jonathan Kuminga. And those guys will talk about him again as they did on Monday at Media Day. And I thought all said, as usual, all the right things and sort of guided that where it was going to go in terms of the public perception of it. And yeah, like I thought it was very interesting. Steve just very openly said, "I'm going to take it a year at a time and see how it goes." And that is a storyline that will be very interesting to follow throughout the season, to see both where he's at and where the Warriors are at and what his future could look like. Because Steve Kerr, as a free agent, would have a lot of interest in, as you said, a lot of different avenues, be it the television booth, be it another sideline, be it returning to the Warriors, and just kind of openly saying, "Yeah, we're going to play it out and see how it goes." It kind of reminds me, it felt like, and I don't know if you felt this way, it reminded me of when Steve Kerr at the start of the 2018-19 season sat on the podium at Media Day and basically said, "Yeah, Kevin Durant's leaving in a year. We all know that. We're just going to enjoy the season, and we're not really going to stress about what this looks like because we know where this is going."
Yeah,
And he
he
didn't
tried
flat out
he
say Kevin was leaving, but he made it clear we all knew where things were going, and he sort of took the air out of the balloon right off the jump. And it felt like the way he had handled your question kind of did the same thing this week.
Yeah, I mean, he tried to impart that on Durant that year, where it was like, this doesn't have to be a like acrimonious end. We
Mm-hmm.
could just celebrate it. There was a time in the middle of that year, he was like almost wanting it to be announced, like, hey, this will be Kevin Durant's final season. And like it's one of his themes of the last few years is this idea that he really wants everybody to end this all gracefully. I think it comes from his last dance. We can go back to that and seeing that not necessarily end gracefully, but
You said how badly the Clay thing went too. I'm sure he would like to not have that keep happening.
I'll give you another example. He has had several conversations with Draymond Green during the whole suspension thing about like end this the right way, end this on a good foot. Don't end this with like suspensions and you're angry and you're just, you work your way off the Warriors and like your career ends kind of abruptly, like end it more gracefully because he thinks everybody deserves that. That's just like, he's a very diplomatic individual and this is him, I think, trying to show everybody in the situation that he will handle his own situation that way as well.
Yeah. No, it will be very interesting. And I guess before we go, we
Yeah.
should take stock of the face of the franchise, Steph Curry. His brother Seth is going to be in for training camp. He will likely be added to the roster later this season fully. The Kuminga thing is done. Al Horford is here. Steve Kerr is back. Team is good. You saw Steph on Monday at Media Day. Where is the stock at on Steph and the Warriors at the moment?
Fine. I think what was he in our NBA rank, like 7 or something like that?
I believe so. Yes, I think he was 7. LeBron James was 8, and Kevin Durant was 9.
Yeah, I mean he's who he always is. He's has a lot on his leadership plate at times, and he is going to be at the forefront quietly behind the scenes of trying to like temper any of these flames that might come up in the Kuminga situation. And he was pretty firm in his press conference about it, and he provides such little drama to the locker room that like that is the one thing from a leadership style standpoint he prefers, is like a really like calm atmosphere, and he will do his best to keep it that way. I think early in the season, but as far as like him as a player, seventh best player in the league, or right in that mix. And they believe still can be, the 1A on a title team. We'll see this year. Jimmy Butler's going to keep calling him Batman, and I'm curious about Butler. We didn't even necessarily mention him. You hear,
Reports to come.
yeah, yeah, you're right. We'll talk Butler next week. How about that?
Yeah, that'll be good. So it's good to see you, Slater. Glad to have you aboard here at .com. Thank you to everybody for watching the stock report. We'll be back again next week. We're going to do this once a week. Check in won't quite be the same as every game as it was on Twitter for 2 minutes, but it'll add up to about the same amount of time. Yeah, be fun to get into the season. It's going to be a fascinating season as always is with the Warriors. And glad we have you on the ground with us later. And we'll be back to talk about it again soon.
Maybe some King stock reports, some Suns stock reports. There's other
Yeah,
teams.
we'll see. There's other teams. There's a lot of stuff going on. Or just won't be all Jonathan Kuminga everyone. It'll just probably be all Jonathan Kuminga half the time. The way things have
Funny
been
thing
going.
is, I just
So.
named like the two teams that were after him in sign and trades. But anyways,
All comes
moving
back
on.
to Jonathan Kuminga. Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week.
NBA on the ESPN.